So, for this week, we're going to be focusing specifically on drag kings and other kinds of queer performances of masculinity. So, we know very well, living in this current historical moment where RuPaul's Drag Race is so mainstream famous now, that the drag queen has long occupied an important place in kind of American culture. We see early evidence of camp performances in the 1970s. There is a long and very visible public culture around drag queens. Even before RuPaul's Drag Race, drag queens still were much more visible than perhaps other forms of queer gender performance. And we see the history of kings as kind of structured by this stunning absence. So hopefully through this class for this week, we'll be looking at these different histories of queer masculine performance to kind of try to fill in some of those historical gaps. So, a brief kind of introduction to drag kings or male impersonators. There, we'll notice throughout this lecture that there's a few different words that we can argue fit into the same history. So, in this video, we see a presentation of different examples in different cultures, different historical moments, and through different masculine aesthetics of drag king performance. So in the video, you'll notice many different kinds of masculinity being performed. And in the video, they kind of create this connection between what was known as male impersonation and drag kinging. So we typically see a drag king as someone who is maybe assigned female at birth or AFAB, but not necessarily. So as someone who dresses up in recognizably male costume and performs theatrically in that costume. So we can kind of make distinctions between the drag king and the male impersonator because male impersonation was this theatrical drama, theatrical genre for at least 200 years in the theater, where it would be women performing in a masculine role. It wasn't necessarily associated with a queer culture. And the idea of a drag king didn't really come into fruition until the 1990s, where drag king culture became something of a subcultural phenomenon in queer clubs in major cities around the world. So for the lecture today and continuing on Friday, our discussion, we're going to be looking at male impersonators, some examples, looking at drag king scenes, so different histories of different gender performance, different masculine gender performance, and the cultures that happen around them. So we'll begin going back to the gay bar as a public and social institution. And we'll be paying close attention to the ways in which race, class, sexuality really shape the performances of masculinity that are available. So we'll look at the way whiteness and the way racialization play into how different kings perform masculinity. So these were the readings for today. And just a reminder that your group responses, group A, B, C, and D, I actually meant to write 1, 2, 3, 4. So my apologies. Will be due Friday at 11:59. So you have until the end of the day. But the two readings that I'm going to be mainly focusing on for this lecture are the Halberstam and Burberry and Johnson readings. One important thing that we need to note is kind of thinking about the way that people get into drag. So, how does one become a drag queen or a drag king? What are the motivations for wanting to do this performance? And although we've been challenging the idea that drag is this opposite sex performance because we've been trying to unpack some of that binary logic, and we don't just assume that all drag kings are women, just as we can't assume that all drag queens are men. Trans folks, non binary folks have been a part of these performances for a while. But the ways that the performances that are available in a particular culture are very much shaped by what spaces people are allowed to be in. And so we talked a lot about how a lot of gay bars historically have been very much segregated by gender. And this also has a lot to do with dominant hegemonic ideas and roles of gender in particular cultural moments. So in a time when women couldn't go to a bar or a public house without a chaperone, obviously that really is going to shape what kind of spaces are available for these performances to occur. So in this, we do see this performer talk about how and why they became a drag king. Drag king culture is not just big in Canada and the US, it's quite big in the UK as well. So here we'll get a perspective of how someone got into drag and the relationship between her drag persona and her own gender identity.
As he came passing the stairs, he said something like, "Thanks, bro," or something. And I was like, yes! Yes! I'm Isabel Adamarco Young. I'm an actor, writer, and activist, and I'm a drag king with Pecs Drag Kings. A drag king is a performer who wants to explore masculinity or kind of shed a light on gender norms. So that will often come in the context of wearing masculinity on a body that isn't normally perceived to be masculine. It's really great fun. And I think there's something inherent about the act of performance in a way that kind of fits with masculinity. You're like the ringleader for people's attention. For me, it's also kind of about a mindset. And I'll often find that on my way to a venue to do a performance, I'll already kind of be carrying myself differently. So travel more with like my hips and my knees, and I kind of take up space more as well. Certainly for Westerners, the classic symbol of masculinity is a suit. That's kind of an easy way in if you want to just see yourself completely differently. And facial hair is really fun to play with because it really changes your perception of yourself really quickly. Obviously, I'm Isabel, and then me in drag is Izzy a man. So that's my kind of base level drag king character. But then, depending on the act, I might be any number of other things on top of that. So I have another act that's called Action Hero, where I kind of roll through loads of 80s action films and lip syncing to like Bruce Willis, to Rocky. It's not something that I was personally really drawn to until it was suggested to me. And then it's been astonishing to see how much it's drawn me out of myself, and it's actually really tapped into something that was there already. And I think it's helped me find my gender identity as well. Partly it's to do with who has historically dominated queer spaces. I think also people have quite low expectations of drag kings. I think it's also because people see femininity as performative more naturally than they do masculinity. So frequently we'll have people being like, so you wear trousers? why? You know, what would you do that would sort of parody masculinity or make for an interesting show? I think it's great. I think it's a really easy way in for a lot of people. It's quite palatable. I would love to see something as mainstream as Drag Race for drag kings. And RuPaul, you know, RuPaul is an icon to any number of queer people, both out and closeted, you know, which is really important to remember. But that does not excuse problematic elements of both the show and RuPaul's own politics. There was one time where I was coming down the stairs at a venue called the Abbey Tavern. I was in full drag, but quite understated, like it was a shirt and trousers. One of the bar staff were coming up the other way. And as he came passing the stairs, he said something like, "Thanks, bro," or something. I was like, yes! Yes! I came into drag kinging, kind of thinking this will be a really great chance to let off some steam about toxic masculinity and about all the bullshit that women and non-binary people are constantly subjected to. That has been the case, so it's been really great. But also, I think it's given me a level of sympathy that I don't think I had before, or not as much. I think really learning what it means to have those expectations on you as a man, and learning about the realities of the effects on men as well, because I do consider it part of my like social duty as a drag king to recognize the realities of being a man. You know, so you look at suicide figures, for instance, among young men, or social progression for young working class boys, you know, and it's awful in a way that's been quite surprising, but it's been really enlightening, and I'm grateful for that as well.